I just think this stuff is fun to talk about. It's all hypotheticals. We don't really have any power. We're just like having an intellectual discussion about what would be an ideal society. When we say decentralization, I think that's like the real part where we come together and like, yeah, it's really hard to argue that decentralizing education, food, everything across the board wouldn't be a huge improvement. And it's a libertarian anarchy type of philosophy, or at least it inches us in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, see, my philosophy is the only one that doesn't force you to do what I want you to do. So
That's a good way
tell
to
me
say
who's
it.
morally superior. Yeah, yeah, but yeah. But look, we're getting into kind of the weeds of libertarian philosophy, of which I could talk all day. But I agree. There are other more interesting things potentially, and there are things that we certainly agree on. And one of them is that, I do think we have some power in our hands, Greg, and in terms of, and I talk about these a lot, in terms of our digital tools. We have encryption, we have cryptocurrencies, some good ones that can do a lot of work for us, and we have decentralization. Really is featured most prominently in the internet, which the cypherpunks in the 1980s realized, hey, the world is shrinking. They noticed all the things we noticed. Um, how governments were expanding and cracking down on things, and they found on the internet ways to communicate with people who previously they couldn't communicate with. They had their own groups, right? They created internet groups. They used encryption to block off parts of the internet. From them, we get things like podcasts, and how we have essentially created a different part of the internet where we can talk about things that your show would not necessarily have been allowed to exist, right? If it had to get approved by the powers that be on the airwaves
Mm-hmm.
20 or 30 years ago. So we do have some power, and I'm generally optimistic.
Yeah, that's true. And I was going to ask you about some of those things. You do spend some time in the later parts of the book breaking down Web 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. And I think a lot of people are familiar with these stages. And of course, a lot of people consider the internet to have been a control operation from the beginning with DARPA's Usenet and all this stuff. But, you know, let's talk about these three stages, because Web 1.0 had a philosophy behind it of freedom and openness and sharing and no real authority or governing body. Some people might say that was the bait to get everyone in to the system that we have now. Web 2.0 is largely considered the corporate takeover of everything. And then 3.0, there's a lot of mixed feelings about it. Some people think it's more control because now you're just living your life in the metaverse controlled by Meta, and all these different corporations will just have their own little individualized worlds you can interact with. But as you say, the blockchain thing, again, everyone has mixed feelings about these buzzwords, but a lot of people are talking about decentralization being rebuilt into Web 3.0, and that's an optimistic thing. I wanted to have you talk about that a little bit, how maybe there's ways to implement Web 3.0 that reignites the spirit of the original web.
Yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of people furiously typing on their computer, on their logged in internet profile about how bad the internet is and all the rest right now. So look, I'll say a few things. I'm not a a crypto shell or an internet shell. I believe people should be out in nature and be avoiding a lot of these tools as much as they can. I don't think they should be all consuming. However, when we do interact with the internet, and anybody who's listening to this show is interacting with the internet and finding value in doing so, whether that's listening to a podcast or on YouTube or somewhere else, they obviously see the value. So we have the internet, we have technology, we confine it to a very particular part of our lives. We go out and live real lives and don't get into the metaverse and don't get into all this other garbage that we easily see as a bad idea. And when we are in the internet world, let's benefit from some of these technologies, right? So the idea that the internet, and it's true that the internet was obviously originally a government project. There were plenty of things that were originally government projects that they made available to the public because they wanted more people using them, because that increases their anonymity set, right? So the Tor browser is an example. The Tor network is a network of basically people running computers that allow other people to connect to them in a way that you're hitting 3 different computers, so that each computer has incomplete information about the one adjacent to it, or at least about the whole process rather. And this is one of the great privacy and anonymity tools that we have. Ross Ulbricht of the Silk Road ran his darknet market, as all darknet markets do, on the Tor network, and it took them years to track this guy down. Right, all the resources of the government trying to track down a single guy who didn't even have great operational security. Okay, so you can tell me that is baiting people into getting into it. You can tell me that all the people who today, if these things were compromised, would be arrested immediately. Millions of people around the world. You can tell me that this is baiting people into the internet. I don't find that too convincing of an argument. To be honest, I think encryption is simply a matter of mathematics, right? It hasn't been cracked. There are different types of encryption. The government, if encryption was cracked, we would be able to get into the government's databases as well, or things of this sort. So I'm getting off into the weeds. Basically, when we get onto the internet, when we use the digital world, there are tools that we can rely on to use. And I'm not telling you to trust anything inherently. I welcome all criticism, but encrypted private messengers, these are a great resource for us to communicate. You have Signal. If you don't like Signal, you have Simplex. There's a number of these out there that use encryption, basically PGP, in a modern way to allow people to talk to each other. And all of the message is gobbledygook in the middle, right? So only you and the recipient are able to see that. So that's a great tool that we have. We have the Tor network. We have VPNs, which I think everybody should run a good VPN like Molvad or iVPN. These are ones that I tend to trust. Everybody should use the Tor network as much as they can. We have excellent free and open source software. So right now I'm running a Linux operating system. This is not controlled by a corporation. This is not controlled by the government. I can go to the GitHub page. I can see every line of code that's running. Maybe I can't understand the code. Okay. Well, let me talk to somebody who can. Okay. We have a consensus. There's a consensus going. All these liberty-minded people who create these tools, hey, there's no funny business happening. Okay. So I'm running an operating system that does that. It's called Linux, and there are many versions of it. If you're interested in getting started, run the Linux Mint. And I talk about this on my privacy tutorial series, escapethetechnocracy.com. Use the code Higherside for 15% off anything in the store. And so I talk about these things, and we have all these tools, and we have something like Standard Notes, which is an encrypted note-taking software that is encrypted on my computer. If it needs to get uploaded, only an encrypted version of that is uploaded so that nobody can see it except me. So we do have these tools, and Web 3.0 is simply our return to relying on services that are not centralized, that are not therefore surveying of our data. And some of the software I just mentioned is an example of Web 3.0. We also have cryptocurrencies. I tend not to proselytize those too much because it has a bad taint to it, but I know people who don't have bank accounts, Greg. They don't have bank accounts. They like, if something is not available to purchase in Monero, which is a privacy crypto, or Bitcoin, they don't buy it. They literally have really no way of buying it. Or that's certainly the first question they ask. So I know people who live off of this stuff. They're totally off the grid. When they do need to use the internet for online purchases, they have tools like Monero or Bitcoin. And this is stuff that I talk about on my show all the time. But of course, I would prefer to be in person, paying in cash, right? That's even better. So anyway, just a few thoughts on Web 3.0 and my thoughts on some of the tools that we have at our disposal.
Can you believe it, people? A video clip and a peek into how that sweet THC sausage is made. For some people, I'm sure it's nice to put a face to the name, so I started making clips that are a little more YouTube friendly than the full show tends to be. Get the full show on any podcasting platform. I prefer to keep it audio only, so we have a more decentralized distribution for a controversial show, and also so I can edit out the ums and ahs and barking dogs and all the things that happen when a person records in their home environment. And then if you really like the show, you can sign up for THC Plus, and instead of 1 hour interviews, you get the full 2 hour interview for just $8. I think that's a better deal, more of a win-win than asking you to support the show by booking a therapy session or buying generic Viagra. It's getting weird out there, folks. So just go to the highersidechats.com or click the link at the top of any set of show notes, and all your wildest dreams will come true. All right? All right. The Higherside Chats.